They told her the job was simple private tutor, one child. A quiet estate outside Vancouver. The pay was obscene, $15,000 a month, cash deposited into whatever account she chose. All she had to do was teach a little girl French and piano and keep her mouth shut about everything else. Evora Ashton read the contract 3 times at the kitchen table of her sister's condo in Burnaby, the space heater humming beside her feet because the landlord still hadn't fixed the radiator. Her sister Janelle was asleep in the next room, tubes running from the portable oxygen concentrator that cost $400 a month they didn't have. She thought about the hospital bill sitting on the counter. She thought about Janelle's next specialist appointment. She thought about the fact that she had exactly $62 and some change to her name. She picked up the pen. The man who met her at the ferry terminal in Horseshoe Bay did not introduce himself. He held a card with her name printed on it, guided her to an armored black Range Rover without a word, and drove north along the sea-to-sky highway while classical music played softly from the speakers. She watched the ocean disappear behind granite cliffs and tried not to think about what she was driving toward. The estate sat above the tree line near Squamish, wedged between 2 ridges like something a Swiss architect had dreamed up in a fever. Glass and dark timber, an infinity pool that would have been gorgeous if it weren't the middle of February, and a security gate that required a thumb scan to open. A woman in her 60s met Evora at the door. She had iron-grey hair pulled back severely and the expression of someone who had seen exactly this moment play out too many times before. "I'm Mrs. Alderton," the woman said. "I run the house. You are the 3rd tutor in 8 months, Mr. Vandermeer expects discretion, punctuality, and above all, no questions about the West Corridor, the security office, or his schedule. Your room is in the East Wing. You will take meals with Rosie in the nursery unless Mr. Vandermeer requests otherwise, and Rosie is 7 years old, very bright and deeply unhappy." Mrs. Alderton turned on her heel. Try not to add to that. Evora met Rosie Vandermeer that same afternoon. The little girl was sitting cross-legged in the middle of an enormous playroom, surrounded by books she had clearly arranged by color rather than title, working on a drawing that she covered immediately when Evora entered. "I don't want a tutor," Rosie said without looking up. "The last one cried on her 3rd day. What did you do to her?" Evora asked, sitting on the floor a few feet away without being invited. Rosie glanced up, surprised. "Nothing, she just cried. People cry for all kinds of reasons," Evora said. "Was she sad?" "Scared. I think she was lonely." Rosie said this matter-of-factly, the way children state things that adults spend years avoiding. "This house makes people lonely." "It's a very quiet house," Evora agreed. Rosie studied her with eyes that were unsettlingly serious. "You don't look scared. I'm absolutely terrified," Evora said honestly. "But I'm better at hiding it than crying." Something in the little girl's face shifted, barely perceptible. She uncovered her drawing. It was a woman with dark hair standing in front of a door, hand raised to knock. The door had no handle on the inside. "That's very good," Evora said quietly. "It's from a dream I have," Rosie said. Then she picked up another pencil and asked, in French, what Evora's favorite season was. They got on fine from there. Evora had been at the estate for 10 days before she saw Gideon Vandermeer in daylight. She had heard him before that. Late footsteps in the corridor at 2 in the morning. Voices, low, controlled, occasionally heated, from behind the study door. Once, the unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the floor, followed by absolute silence that stretched for a full minute before it resumed as if nothing had happened. She had told herself, none of my business. She had chosen deliberate ignorance the way a person walking a cliff path chooses not to look down. Then she was in the kitchen at 7 in the morning making Rosie's oatmeal, and he was standing at the island in a white dress shirt rolled to the elbows, reading something on his phone with the focused stillness of a man accustomed to receiving bad news and processing it without any visible reaction. He was taller than she'd expected, broad through the shoulders, the kind of face that would have been handsome if it ever relaxed. Strong jaw, dark eyes, a scar along the left cheekbone that was old and deliberate looking. He had the quality of a building that has withstood several significant storms without being designed to be beautiful. It simply endured. He looked up. "You're the new one," he said. "Evora Ashton. Your daughter speaks excellent French for 7. Something flickered across his expression. She got it from her mother. Evora had been briefed in the thinnest possible terms that Rosie's mother was gone. She didn't push. "She's also exceptionally good at drawing," Evora said instead. "Has she ever had formal art instruction?" Gideon Vandermeer looked at her as though she'd said something in a language he only half spoke. "I didn't know she drew. She draws constantly." Evora kept her voice neutral. "She's talented. If you'd like, I could incorporate it into her learning time, instead of treating it as separate." He set his phone down on the marble counter. For a moment she thought he was going to dismiss her or say something cold and curt that would end the conversation. Instead, he said, "What would that look like?" She told him. He listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he said simply, "Do it," and picked up his phone again. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The threat arrived on a Thursday evening in early March. Evora was reading to Rosie in the window seat of the library. A chapter from a novel Rosie had chosen herself, which was impressive in its vocabulary and slightly alarming in its subject matter. When she heard the change in the house, it was a feeling more than a sound, a sudden cessation, like all the ambient noise being switched off at once. Then the soft, rapid voices of men moving through the ground floor with purpose. Her instincts were city instincts. She'd grown up in East Van, had walked those streets since she was a teenager, had learned to read the way a block sounds before it sounds wrong. She knew immediately that something was wrong. She closed the book. "Rosie," she said, keeping her voice light, "let's play that hiding game you showed me, the one in the back of the wardrobe." Rosie looked at her. Rosie was 7, but her eyes were much older. "Is someone coming? I don't know. But let's go anyway." They went. Evora settled Rosie behind a false panel in the wardrobe, a detail she'd discovered by accident 2 weeks earlier, which now seemed less accidental, with her stuffed rabbit and strict instructions to stay until Evora came back or until Mrs. Alderton knocked 3 times. Then Evora went back out into the hallway. She nearly ran into Gideon Vandermeer coming the other way. He grabbed her arm to stop them colliding. He was in a different suit now, darker, and there was something in the set of his face that had not been there at breakfast. He took in the empty library behind her, the closed wardrobe. "Where is she?" "Somewhere safe," Evora said. "What's happening?" "You need to get to your room and lock the door." "What's happening?" she repeated. His jaw worked. He was not a man who answered questions. She could see that plainly, the resistance in his whole bearing, the default toward containment. But she was also standing in his hallway, refusing to move, and Rosie was hidden 6 feet away, and whatever was wrong was getting closer because she could hear a vehicle on the gravel below. "There are people outside who should not be outside," he said. "They are not there for you, but they will use whatever is in front of them, including Rosie." The answer was in his silence. "Then I'm not going to my room," Evora said. He stared at her. She had the brief, disorienting impression of someone recalibrating, a person who was always operated by a fixed set of rules encountering a variable they hadn't planned for. "Stay behind me," he said, "and if I tell you to move, you move without asking why." "Fine," she said, "but I'm not leaving her side." They waited. The vehicle did not come to the door. It sat at the gate for 4 minutes, she counted, and then left. The men in the house gradually resumed their normal positions. The ambient noise returned. Gideon Vandermeer stood in the corridor for a long moment after it was over, not moving. Then he went to the wardrobe and knocked 3 times. The panel opened. Rosie looked out with the rabbit pressed against her chin. "Papa," she said. He said nothing. He just went down on one knee and held her. Evora looked away. That evening, Gideon appeared in the doorway of the nursery after Rosie was asleep. Evora was gathering books from the floor. He said her name and she straightened. "You have good instincts," he said. "Most people freeze. I grew up in a neighborhood where freezing was expensive," she said. He looked at her with the same quality of attention he'd given her in the kitchen, like someone reading a document carefully before signing it. "I should tell you something," he said. "So you understand what you've agreed to. I signed an NDA, not a book deal. I'm not going to tell anyone anything. That's not what I mean." He came into the room and stood near the window, keeping his distance in a way that felt deliberate. "The people outside the gate tonight, that won't be the last time. I have business interests that attract a specific kind of opposition. Rosie has no part in that, but proximity makes her a target." Evora sat down on the edge of the reading chair. "I figured that out somewhere around the thumbscan gate." A ghost of something crossed his face, not quite a smile. "But adjacent to one. The other tutors left," he said. "When they understood. I have reasons to stay," Evora said. "That's mine to decide." Gideon Vandermeer looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said quietly. "I suppose it is." She didn't ask what his business interests were. She didn't need the language. She'd grown up adjacent to enough of the world's grey economies to read the shape of a thing without being told its name. She stayed because Rosie needed her to stay, and because Janelle's medical bills didn't care about her squeamishness, and because she admitted this only to herself, very quietly. There was something in this house that felt like it was waiting to be warmer than it was. The weeks that followed developed their own careful rhythm. Rosie's French improved. Her drawings got better, more confident. She started adding color, then context, then stories. She began to talk more during lessons, little bursts of conversation about things that mattered to her. The deer she'd seen at the tree line in the mornings, The book she'd found in the library that she thought was secretly about mermaids, even though no one on the cover looked like a mermaid. The fact that her papa had laughed last Tuesday and she'd been so startled she dropped her fork. "He doesn't laugh much," Rosie told Evora with the gravity of a small documentarian. "No," Evora agreed, "but it's a good laugh when it happens." Rosie considered this. "How do you know?" "You've heard it once," Evora said. "You were telling him about the deer." Rosie looked enormously pleased with this. "I'm going to tell him more things about the deer," she said firmly, and picked up her pencil. Gideon began having dinner with them on Thursdays. It started without announcement or explanation. He simply appeared at the table one Thursday evening and sat down. And Rosie launched immediately into the deer update as promised. And Evora filled the inevitable silences by asking Rosie questions she already knew the answers to, which let the conversation carry itself. By the third Thursday, it felt less like an experiment and more like a fact. He asked Evora questions sometimes, careful ones, about her education, where she'd taught before, what she'd studied. She answered honestly. He listened the way he did everything, with complete, disconcerting attention. "You could have done more than this," he said one evening, after Rosie had gone to find her drawings to show him. "More than what? Teaching. You have a master's in linguistics. You could be at a university." "I could," Evora said, but Rosie needed someone specific, and the university wasn't paying $15,000 a month. He winced slightly at the honesty of that. "Fair. My sister has a degenerative lung condition," Evora said. "She's not going to get better. She can get stable with the right support." "I'm the support." She shrugged. "So here I am." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "Here you are," he repeated softly, and there was something in it she didn't entirely pass. Then Rosie came back with an armful of drawings, and everything else was beside the point. She should have known the calm wouldn't hold. On a Saturday morning in April, Evora took Rosie to the greenhouse at the edge of the north garden. A long glass structure full of herbs and winter tomatoes and an ancient lemon tree that Mrs. Alderton tended with fierce personal devotion. Rosie wanted to draw the lemon tree. Evora wanted coffee and 15 minutes that felt ordinary. They had been there for about half an hour when Evora heard the gate alarm sound, a single tone, different from the test tone she'd learned, and felt the same wrongness as before, only sharper. She said, "Rosie, stay right here, right next to me," and moved to the greenhouse window. A white van was coming up the drive. Wrong. The estate received no deliveries on Saturdays. Mrs. Alderton had made that tediously clear. The van was moving at the measured speed of something that doesn't want to appear to be in a hurry. Evora scanned the grounds. She could see one of the regular guards at the south corner of the house. He was on his radio, another near the front door, hand at his jacket. She counted the distance between herself and the estate's back entrance. Too far, with Rosie, too exposed. The greenhouse had a rear service door that opened into the kitchen garden. She'd used it twice before when the main path was muddy. "Okay," she said, turning to Rosie and keeping her voice steady with some effort. "We're going through the back. I need you to hold my hand and walk fast and not stop moving until I say we're done." Rosie grabbed her hand without being asked twice. She was frightened. Evora could feel it in her grip, but she didn't make a sound. They were halfway through the kitchen garden when the van stopped in the drive and 3 men got out. Evora didn't look back. She pushed through the service door and down the utility corridor toward the back staircase. She heard the first shot from somewhere outside. Rosie flinched but didn't stop. They reached the safe room, a detail Evora had located deliberately in her first week, the way she'd located the false panel, the way she'd always figured out the exits first. And Evora got the door open and got Rosie inside and was about to pull it shut when footsteps hit the corridor behind her. She turned. One of the men from the van was at the end of the hall. He was not one of the estate guards. He was raising something in his right hand. Evora did not calculate. She did not weigh options. She shoved Rosie fully inside the safe room with one hand and stepped sideways into the door frame, using her own body to block the angle of the shot. The crack was deafening in the stone corridor. The force hit her left side and knocked her into the wall. She heard Rosie scream from inside the room. She kept her shoulder braced against the doorframe, kept the door sealed, kept her body between the man and the child, until she heard running from the other end of the corridor and a second shot and then nothing. Then Gideon was there. He was saying her name, both syllables with a quality she had never heard from him before. Her legs weren't cooperating and she slid down the doorframe a little, and he caught her before she hit the floor, one arm coming around her back with an urgency that was nothing like his usual controlled manner. "The door," she managed. "Rosie's in the room. I know. My men have the corridor. She's safe." His voice was tight. "You're bleeding, I noticed," Evora said. It was a graze. She understood this later, from the surgeon, who explained it with a calm precision that she appreciated. The bullet had caught the left side of her ribcage, cracking 2 ribs and scoring a line across her skin that would scar but would not kill her. She had been lucky. She knew she had been lucky. But in the corridor, in the minutes before the medical team arrived, with Gideon's hand pressing hard against her side and his face very close to hers, she was primarily focused on staying upright. "Hold on," he said. "Just hold on." "I'm holding," she said. "Rosie," he said again tightly. "She's fine. I got her in the room." Evora closed her eyes for a second. "She's fine, Gideon," the first time she'd used his given name. She registered it distantly, too tired to be strategic about it. He registered it too. The medical team worked in the estate's private clinic, a room she'd never known existed off the north wing, with the kind of efficient silence that suggested this was not the first time. Gideon stood in the hall outside. Evora knew because she could see his shadow under the door, and it didn't move for 2 hours. When they let her out, she found him leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his eyes focused on nothing. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him, like a man who had been genuinely frightened. "Rosie?" she asked. "She's with Mrs. Alderton. She's upset, but she's not hurt." He pushed off the wall and looked at her directly. "Because of you. She's a smart kid. She didn't panic. She didn't panic because you didn't panic." He said this with a flatness that wasn't coldness. It was the opposite of coldness. It was someone being very precise about something that mattered. "You put yourself between her and that door. She's 7 years old," Evora said. "What was I supposed to do?" Gideon stared at her. There was something happening behind his eyes, some internal reckoning she didn't have access to. "Come with me," he said. He took her to the study, not the working office, but a smaller room she hadn't been in, lined with books that looked actually read rather than decorative, with 2 chairs and a fireplace that was currently lit. He settled her into one of the chairs with the careful attention of someone who is not accustomed to being careful about other people and is learning the motions as he goes. Then he stood at the fireplace for a moment with his back to her. "The men who came today," he said. "They were sent by someone named Hargreave. He was a business partner until he wasn't, and he has been attempting to recalibrate the terms of that separation for the past 6 months. He paused. "He thinks pressuring Rosie is leverage." "She's a child," Evora said. "I know." He turned to face her. "I have kept her here because I thought isolation was protection. I am beginning to understand I was wrong about that." Evora watched him. He was a man dismantling an argument he had lived by, doing it in real time in front of her, and it cost him something visible to do it. "Hargreave isn't going to stop," she said. "No, but I have something now that I didn't have this morning." His eyes were steady on hers. "I know exactly where the decision was made and who made it. My second-in-command gave Hargreave the gate code." Evora was quiet for a moment. "How long has he been with you?" 11 years. Another silence. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. Gideon looked briefly surprised, as though sympathy was not what he had been expecting. Then he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need the honest answer, not the polite one." "All right. Are you afraid of me? Now that you understand what this is?" Evora considered him. The firelight picked out the lines of his face, the scar, the tiredness, the thing underneath the control that was doing its best to stay controlled. "I'm afraid of the situation," she said carefully. "I was afraid this afternoon, but you're not what frightens me." He seemed to exhale something he'd been holding for a long time. "What happens now?" she asked. "I handle Hargreave. Tonight." He said it the way he said everything consequential, flatly, finally, without decoration. "And his man in my organization? That will take a few days. And then," he stopped. "And then? And then I would like to ask you something else, but not until after." He left that same night with 4 of his men. Mrs. Alderton made tea and sat with Evora in the kitchen without speaking, which Evora appreciated more than conversation. Rosie came down at midnight in her pajamas, having refused to sleep, and climbed into the chair next to Evora and said nothing for a while either. Then Rosie said, "You got hurt because of us." "I got hurt because someone made a bad decision," Evora said. "That's not because of you, but you stayed in the doorway." Rosie looked at her with those old eyes. "You could have gone in the room with me." "I could have," Evora agreed. "Why didn't you?" Evora thought about this. "Because if I went in the room, the door might not have stayed closed, and the door had to stay closed." She touched Rosie's hair gently. "It's a simple problem, really. It just looks scary from the outside." Rosie leaned against her good side. "Are you going to leave?" "No," Evora said, and she meant it in a way that had stopped being about the money some time ago, without her particularly noticing the transition. Rosie fell asleep in the chair. Evora stayed awake. Gideon came back on the second day. He walked into the kitchen in the early afternoon, while Evora and Rosie were working on a drawing of the lemon tree from memory. Rosie had decided memory drawings were more interesting than observational ones, and he stood in the doorway and looked at them, The way people sometimes look at things they thought they might not get to see again. "It's done," he said. Rosie looked up. "Is it like the last time done, or is it really done?" "Really done," he said. Something about the way he said it suggested that Hargreaves' ability to send anyone anywhere had been conclusively resolved. Rosie studied him. Then she picked up a yellow pencil and held it out to him. "Come draw the lemons," she said. "You're the only one who's actually seen them recently." Gideon Vandermeer sat down at the kitchen table and drew lemons with his daughter. Evora watched from across the table and thought about thresholds, the ones you cross without deciding to, the ones that close behind you without making a sound. Later, when Rosie had gone to find her rabbit, Gideon set down the pencil and looked at her. "I said I wanted to ask you something else," he said. "You did say that." He was quiet for a moment, asking things. "I am accustomed to stating them." "I've noticed," she said. "Go ahead anyway." He met her eyes. "Stay, not on the contract terms, not as the tutor. I would like you to stay because you want to, not because you signed something." He paused. "And I want to know if what I think has been happening between us over the past months is what I think it is, or if I am significantly misjudging the situation." Evora looked at him for a long moment. "You're not misjudging it," she said. He exhaled. "But I have conditions," she said. "Of course you do," he said, and there was something in his voice that was warm in a way she hadn't heard from him before. "Tell me, Rosie has a real art teacher by autumn, not incorporated into French lessons. A real one, separate, done. You eat dinner with her at least 3 times a week. Not on a schedule, not formally. Just dinner, done. And no more secrets that put her in the path of things like last Saturday. If there's a threat, I need to know so I can prepare, not find out when a van is already in the driveway." He held her gaze. "That one is harder for me." "I know," she said. "I'm asking anyway." A long pause. Then, "Done." Evora nodded. "Then I'll stay." He picked up the yellow pencil again and looked at it. "You came here because of the money," he said. "For your sister." "Yes. And you would have left if not for." "I would have left if the money had stopped," she said honestly. "And then I wouldn't have." She watched his hands. "People surprise themselves. That's just what happens." "Rosie thinks you were sent," he said quietly. "Sent by who?" He didn't answer that directly. He just said, "Her mother used to draw. Rosie didn't start drawing until you came. Evora didn't know what to do with that, so she left it where it was. Autumn came to the estate like an apology. All copper light and the smell of wood smoke and the kind of cold that feels earned rather than punishing. Rosie's art teacher drove up from Squamish on Tuesdays. Rosie had stopped choosing sadness as a subject and moved on to animals, doorways, and a recurring series of what she described as the house but friendlier. Gideon ate dinner with them 4 times a week, then 5. He started learning the deer-related updates unprompted. He began, slowly and somewhat painfully, to laugh more than once a week. Rosie tracked this as faithfully as a naturalist logging a rare species recovery. Evora's sister Janelle came to stay for 3 weeks in November, in the guest suite on the east wing that Evora had quietly asked about, and Gideon had quietly arranged. Janelle took one look at the estate, one look at Gideon Vandermeer, and one look at the way Evora moved around the kitchen, making coffee, without thinking about where anything was kept, and said absolutely nothing, which was how Evora knew she had understood completely. On a Wednesday evening in early December, Evora was in the library, the one with the fireplace and the 2 chairs. When Gideon came in and stood in the doorway for a moment before crossing the room and sitting in the opposite chair. "I want to ask you something else," he said. She looked up from her book. "You keep doing that. I keep having things to ask." He was quiet for a moment. "You said once that people surprise themselves. That it's just what happens. I did say that. I have surprised myself," he said considerably, "in the past year." He set something on the side table between them. She looked down large, not ostentatious, a thin band with a single dark stone that caught the firelight, and held it. "I am not good at asking things," he said again, "but I am trying to get better at it." Evora looked at the ring. Then she looked at him, the scar, the eyes, the man who had once stood in a corridor for 2 hours under a door to be sure she was going to be all right. "I know," she said. "You've been practicing." He almost smiled. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she said. "Obviously." He picked up the ring and she held out her left hand, and he put it on with the same careful, deliberate attention he had learned to give to everything that mattered to him. From the corridor they heard Rosie's voice and the sound of small feet pausing outside the door, the unmistakable listening silence of a child who is trying very hard to appear to have been walking past by coincidence. Gideon raised his voice. "Rosie," a pause. "Yes, come in." The door opened. Rosie stood in her pajamas and socks, rabbit under her arm, looking between them with the particular expression of someone who has been hoping for a specific outcome, and is now attempting to assess whether they've received it. She looked at Evora's hand. Okay, Rosie said in a voice that contained approximately 6 months of patient, 7-year-old strategizing. Okay, good. And she walked into the room and climbed into the chair next to Evora as she had done once before in a kitchen in the middle of the night, and leaned against her good side and said nothing else. Gideon watched them. The fire moved. Outside, the deer were at the tree line again, and the estate, this house that had once been described to Evora as a fortress and to Rosie as lonely, held its breath and then let it go.